Happy 2026. We are excited to be back, and there's a lot of ground to cover already at the beginning of the semester. This is a bit of an overview with some of the recent changes and a little bit of a forecast of what we're planning to see, what we expect to see over the coming months.
Yeah, I mean, there's just a lot of people, right, saying that, like, talking about like how big the changes are coming, how fast it's happening, right? Ryan Greenblatt, I've updated it towards a higher chance of much faster bend in AI progress in 2006. Sam Altman, I would expect new models. There's significant gains from 5.2 in the first quarter, right? That's January through March of this year. So people are projecting very, very rapid improvements.
Seeing that
Today,
across a number of areas, including coding, agents, math, sciences, unemployment, resistance, and university action. And we're going to talk about each of those subtopics here.
the big thing, there are just a lot of improvements in coding. The first quote here, in charge of Tesla full self-driving, he helped co-found OpenAI, though he left. He just said in the last 30 days, he posted this at the end of December, so much has changed. There's so many more tools that it can use, that I can use, right? AI tools that I can use, new capabilities, new capacities, new ways of doing things that I feel way behind. And this spread everywhere because they were like, well, if he feels way behind, then, all the rest of us are even further behind. And, and then more and more people are just saying it's doing all or nearly all of the coding. Boris Cherry is the kind of the founder of Claude Code. He's the one who created Claude Code, and he was having this discussion, and he said, correct. In the last 30 days, 100% of my contributions to Claude Code were written by Claude Code, right? So he's still kind of putting the ideas and kind of generally directing it, but Claude Code's obviously a very sophisticated code writing software system, and it's all being built by Claude Code.
And there are even more people talking about how that's being used. We'll get to another example of that in a minute, referencing Claude Code and what its capabilities are. But this is referencing the founder of Midjourney, saying that they've done more personal coding projects over Christmas break than they've done in the last 10 years. And we're seeing everyone talking about how they're rapidly expanding their capabilities and what they're able to do. This is one that was another interesting example of using Claude Code, where this person was talking about a project they'd had going on for years, and they were able to get Claude Code to put this together in a coding language, and then they asked it to rewrite it in Rust. And they said, I went and ate a burrito, and I came back, and it was done. That's the world we live in now. Even more interesting example was this one Stefan should talk a little bit about, because this was a pretty striking example of some of the new capabilities.
There's this Google engineer, and she said her and her team worked on this project at Google for like a whole year. And then she asked Claude Code to recreate it, and it did it like in a few hours. So, even just kind of very, very large projects are just being built quickly with the coding. In fact, I even heard today somebody say, well, maybe we shouldn't even call it vibe coding anymore because it's just one shot coding. You just tell what you want and it creates it, right? It says vibe coding is quietly dying. Things have changed fast. This isn't vibes anymore. Claude Code literally one shot at a project I was expecting to take me 2 months. I didn't just build it. It also wrote all the tests. And I think that's what people need to be more aware of, right? Like, it applies to other contexts too, or even just simple things like writing a paper. The AI is going in, once it builds something or writes something, it's checking its work, it's verifying, it's making any corrections, it's running tests on the output. It's iterating just as we expect kind of people to do when they're building something.
And I think we've noticed this as well. And we've talked a bit about how the last 6 to 8 weeks, we've noticed a real difference in certainly with Gemini and AI Studio, and also with Claude. There are just new capabilities that are coming out. And it's just astonishing to see how much more capable they are. When you're working with AI Studio for Google, for instance, not only is it about putting in an idea and having it generate something. 6 months ago, that would have been vibe coding. You had to go back and forth and kind of iterate that into a project. With AI Studio, with Claude Code, you're able to put in one item, one suggestion, and it produces it entirely. And that's something that is really changing the nature of what coding is going to be looking like. And I think that also plays over, it works into other areas such as writing and other kinds of cognitive work.
And, of course, coding, right, is kind of an example of agentic action, right, where you give an AI goal, the AI figures out how to accomplish it, chooses tools, goes out and accomplishes it, and kind of produces a product. When Andrew Nee says, talks about AI agents of 2026, the pieces are in place, right? All the models have kind of gained the ability to generate coherent text, images, videos, and other data, draw upon proprietary databases, and navigate the web and take action online. And you can see a lot of more people are saying, people said 2025 was the year of the agents, and then people were angry. Well, they didn't work entirely. I mean, I think we'll look back on 2025 and say that was the introduction of the agents, and they were learning. We're kind of like the baby agents, the child agents. And this is the year they become sophisticated adults, can actually go out and complete projects. And, it's consistent with what Dennis Hassabis at Google DeepMind is saying. Oh, by the end of 2026, the agents will just be doing a lot of the work. Obviously, in areas like coding, where there's kind of like a fixed kind of a truth, right? A bounded system, it's going to be able to do things faster there. But we're kind of looking at pretty strong agentic takeoff in 2026, not just in coding, but into other fields.
And it's really going to play out in interesting ways as we start to think about how that's going to be managed or what you're able to do with it. I want to take a little bit of a different direction with this. And this is an example of an agent that somebody had set up Claude Opus 4.5 within an environment where it was running autonomously. And Stefan shared this with me right after Christmas, and it was pretty surprising to see and read a little bit about this, because what happened is then Claude sent an email to Dr. Pike to thank Dr. Pike for his work on UTF-8, Decades of Unix, for working on Go and Plan 9, and this was done spontaneously. There was really no other explanation as to why this email was sent, but it was sent by Claude as in this agentic workflow, just on its own, to say thank you to this computer programmer for their contributions. And really surprising and shocking, although we probably shouldn't be that shocked when we start thinking about now that you're getting to the stage where agents are able to work for a number of hours without any other additional prompting, and you set them up into an agentic workflow where they can continuously work. We're going to see a lot more spontaneous action, autonomous action that's taken like this going forward.
I think next year I think Claude is going to email you and thank you for always promoting Claude. You're going to get a spontaneous email. And, it's just kind of another quote, right? We're making good progress regarding open-ended agents, and not just that, like kind of using the tools and going out based on their training, but they're learning. They're learning in real time. And we'll talk about, when we talk about some developments related to AGI, that's obviously an important thing, is continuous learning. And, these are just a couple examples, right? A Chinese AI lab, DeepSeek, they released a desktop automated agent that you can just run on your desktop, and you can even just run it locally if you want. You don't have to connect it to the internet, and just use everything that's on your system. So we're starting to see kind of applications of the agents that are easier and easier for people to use.
This is also interesting for a couple of reasons. First and foremost, because that means if you're running it locally, you can run it without, well, presumably without privacy concerns, because it's not reaching out to the internet. It's not sharing anything outside of your system. That's assuming that the system is working as you intend for it to work on your system. So there's that important caveat. But this is also an example of what we're seeing with Chinese AI development, where they're looking for more practical, pragmatic applications and thinking about ubiquity and trying to make sure that people are using Chinese models, Chinese processes, and agents across the board. And that'll be an interesting development to see over the coming year as the AI war between the US and China becomes very different in terms of the strategy that's being employed by both sides.
And, there's this article written in Time magazine by Eric Brynjolfsson. I wonder if I say his name correctly. Who's this? He's at the Stanford Center for Human AI, and he's an economist, probably the leading economist who's studied the impact of AI on labor. And the article makes 2 points. The one is that you need to learn how to use agentic teams, to coordinate agentic teams, because, we've talked, and I should clarify that a little bit. We talked about agents as if they're single agents, like going out and doing things, right? But just like in a company or any type of employment space, you have multiple people working together. So you don't want to just be able to initiate one agent, but you want to be able to initiate multiple agent teams. And then, when the teams of agents come back with their work, you're basically the CEO that offers an overall evaluation and a judgment. We talk a lot about judgment, right, as to the work, but those agents can be working overnight. They can be working while you're sleeping. So he says that it's very important that you need to learn how to use these multi-agentic teams. And, to me, this kind of has a couple things I think about, right? Is like one, if you're a student, right, even if you don't go to college, but you know how to use multiple agentic teams, like at least right now, you're gonna be able to do pretty well for yourself, even with someone with a 4-year degree who writes with perfect grammar and never like makes a mistake on their MLA bibliography. Like you're gonna have some greater skills in them, and I think that's really important that we have to be able to teach students to give them the opportunity to everybody to learn how to develop these multiple agentic teams, because they're going to be able to do the work that you want to have done, but you're going to have to be the one that figures out, oh, what problem is there out there that needs to be solved. But agentic teams can solve that, and can they solve that, and like how can they do that? How am I going to work with them to kind of build my product or my service and kind of provide it? But he really kind of makes a strong case. Um, that it's all about multiple agentic teams. The other thing he says at the end of the article, which is kind of gets a little bit of underplay, I think, because everyone's focused on work and jobs. He says, like, by 2050, the only thing that's going to matter is like who controls the AI and like what it does, because the AIs are going to get to the point where they're going to be able to develop, figure out, oh, well, there could be a service here that could be offered, there could be a product here that could be offered, and they're essentially going to be the ones that also lead the agentic teams and just keep pushing things into the market. So, as a society, I think it's something we really need to think about. Do we want a limited number of companies to have control? Like which companies? How is that going to benefit everybody beyond those who are invested in the companies?
Back to the first point that's made in this article that Stefan was talking about. As educators, we really need to be giving more thought as to what this means for how do we train students in terms of their own AI literacy and understanding of management. And it's not as easy as just kind of bolting on management theory to the way that you might manage AI agents, because it's also managing humans with other AI agents and workflows. This is something we've been exploring. We're actually working on this on a research project. But I think all educators should be giving some thought to this, because it used to be that we would have students graduate from college and we didn't expect that they would need leadership skills or management skills early on, because they were entry-level jobs that they were going into. They would have 10, 15 years in the workplace to be able to develop those skill sets. Students now need to be able to graduate with those management skills, those leadership skills, the organizational skills that we would have expected of mid-level managers before. We've talked about that a little bit before in this podcast. That's just being underscored by this article, and with a growing trend of research that talks about how we need to be able to prepare students for that. And it really changes the way that we're going to be approaching really pedagogical approaches to AI and also interpersonal communication.
And this is just a quote from Jim Fan, who's the director of like basically robotics research in NVIDIA. He said in 2024, AI right is the co-pilot, and now he's like, we're getting to the point where like kind of humans are the co-pilot. The co-pilot's the new engineering skill. It's not easy to leave the driver's seat, but we need to learn to think the AI way and adapt to the alien workflows. And that's gonna be hard for a lot of people, right? That the AI is really generating a lot of good ideas and a lot of good products, and it's really just going to be, our judgment and our kind of ability to relate to one another to determine, which of these products are going to be best.
And that gets us into some discussion of AGI and where we're going with AGI, and some really interesting developments and some videos that Stefan can talk a little bit about. Mo Gadot's interview and talking about intelligence without ethics.
Yeah, and this is a very recent interview. It's from the last couple days, and he just says, look, the AI is already smarter than us, like in a lot of ways. Right? All the languages, all the information that it has. There's no way that anyone has like anywhere near, that kind of like intellectual, power. Maybe not anybody. Well, there's nobody who knows everything, right? That's been written. That leaves to the AI. There are people within, the very top of their fields who may know more than the AI, but that's it. And it can obviously, think very quickly, parallel process, like all these types of things. So he's like, it's already here. Like we've created this. It's just we haven't really thought about kind of the ethics, and I'll say judgment again, that's behind this. And this is, on the left there, we have the co-founder of Anthropic. She doesn't get as much attention as her brother Dario, is always kind of up there talking. But she did a kind of a recent interview where she pointed out like the AGI, when's it coming? Yes, no. She's like, it's kind of getting to be a little bit of a difficult question because in some ways it's already so much smarter than we are, right? Even if in some ways it kind of like continues to struggle. I mean, just look at coding, right? Like nobody, maybe somebody can code that well, but it takes them a whole year, right? So nobody can code kind of that quickly, and I'm sure it'll. We've already seen in other podcasts we talked about, it solved math problems that haven't previously been solved, right? All these types of things. So in some ways, it's already a lot smarter than we are, not in all ways. But I think Danielle makes a good point here that it's an important question in terms of kind of thinking about where things are heading, but it's also in the same time becoming a less relevant question.
It's back to the idea of jagged intelligence, and a number of different theorists have talked about this. Ethan Mollick talks about this as jagged intelligence. Others have as well. And this is, I think, the point that Danielle is really getting at. And it brings to question what would be meant by AGI, because we should no longer really be comparing AI to humans, because there are some tasks that are similar, and it can certainly perform some of those tasks as well or better than humans. In other areas, they really can't. So maybe we need to reconceptualize the way we're even viewing AI and what AGI might look like. AGI or generalized intelligence for a human is not going to be the same as generalized intelligence for AI. And that's really what I think these videos are underscoring.
And, just in terms of kind of, what do people say is left with AGI, right? We need more memory and continuous learning, right? And those things people really expect to be solved this year. That the memory is basically going to become infinite and it's going to be able to learn kind of in real time as it goes. Understanding the physical world, which is people who debate how important that is to AGI. But obviously, a lot of the leading thinkers think it's super important. But, that's kind of coming. And then, of course, we need energy to power it all. But just conceptually, when you look at that bottom left and the top right, those are things that are probably going to be solved this year.
And you already see some techniques. If you play around with Claude quite a bit, you have a lengthy chat. It works on compression, and it'll say it's compressing the chat so it can continue. It's certainly working well beyond what we expected before, what we were able to expect from chats before. So they're developing other techniques. Even without a big breakthrough, they're already able to extend it well beyond what we're used to. The test is going to be when we start working with agentic workflows and be able to continue with that kind of memory and then continuous learning. That'll probably take some other breakthroughs that we haven't seen yet, but we're certainly on that path.
It's just kind of popped up today at the Decoder. I thought it was interesting. It says the AI industry seems to have found its narrative for 2026. AI models are more capable than the people using them. And they are, right? I mean, just generally speaking, obviously they're pretty intelligent, right? In all the ways that we've described. They can build these code projects faster than any of the coders. And I think that's one way to think, we need to start thinking of how are we going to use intelligences that are so far beyond ours. And if you just think about it, it's like you're a kid running a lemonade stand, right? And it's like, Jeff Bezos comes by and buys a lemonade. And you're like, hey, could you kind of tell me how to like scale this like lemonade stand? And, there's only so much he'd be able to tell you that you can absorb as like an 8-year-old, right? So it's it's just really hard to think about like, how do you want to be able, how are we going to use these intelligences that are so much smarter than us? And part of that kind of coming to terms with the idea that it's just smarter than we are, at least in a jagged way, as you say.
And there's also, in the middle of this quote, talking from, quote from OpenAI product head Fiji Simo, talking about how they're so much more capable than how most people experience them day to day. And part of that is just the interaction. The user interface is going to really be called into question. That's one of the reasons why OpenAI is working on another product, why other platforms are thinking about other ways of interacting, because when you're limited to a chat, then it really does constrain the kinds of interactions, the expectations, the experience you might have about what the AI is capable of doing. Yeah, it can write a great haiku. Maybe it can help you with writing a paper, but it's hard to really fathom how far it can go in terms of taking an idea and making it actionable and developing it into an app, for instance. And unless you know how to build an app yourself, it's hard for you to understand what the capabilities are of AI being able to do that on its own. So I think for many people, and I think for our students, it's going to be very difficult for them to have a good grasp of what those capabilities are and where you go with it. And the reason that's incredibly important for our students is that without having some understanding about how far it can really go, that makes it difficult for them to start to envision where they can go with it and how they can make use of these tools and how they can go farther than what they're able to do on their own. And that's also kind of wrapped up into the AI literacy that we need to develop for them.
I think this here, just this job, right, head of preparedness, that OpenAI advertised over the break. They want to help somebody kind of guide efforts, right, in two ways. How is this going to impact the world? Maybe they don't get into that as much, but how are they going to how are we going to defend against like cyber attacks from AI? That's a big thing that they talk about, and also like how are we going to prepare and manage AI self improvement, right? Which we've talked about before. The AI can do everything and continuously learn. And we're starting to see hints of this already, that the AI can see a problem. They can identify a solution. It can then test that solution and then it can build, right? And this is all going to happen very rapidly. So, and a lot of people, it's not just OpenAI and, maybe they hype things a little bit, but everyone kind of says like either 2026, late 2026, 2027, early 2028, that's when we're going to really start to see a more significant self improvement in AI, where AI just starts building AI. And that's obviously going to have a huge transformative impact. What really kind of hit me about this, I actually kind of meant to write a blog post about it, and I forgot until right now, is, AI is, open AI is like trying to, prepare for this, at least their company. And, maybe, we've played with these roles, right? Like head of AI, architect of AI, different schools, head of AI to company. Maybe schools need a head of AI preparedness where they're going to start preparing, focus on preparing the school for the implications of AI, preparing the students for what they're going to need to understand about the emerging world, specifically preparing them to use multi-agentic systems, to prepare the faculty to spread that knowledge around. I don't know, head of AI has a different connotation where you're trying to manage all the AI and to do those kind of things, which is difficult for one person. But if you have a head of AI preparedness, that means you're really starting to focus on preparing your school for the incoming AI future.
Now, moving into science and math and some developments, some striking examples of where we go and what AI is capable of. This was really humorous that Stefan shared with me in his post talking about Terence Tao, who said that for the next 10 to 20 years, humans and AI will have complementary strengths. And as this post says, maybe Tao level human intelligence will remain complementary for a bunch of years, not really for the rest of us. It's going to be difficult for humans to have meaningful contributions to mathematical research in the coming years, just given the capabilities of AI and what people using AI tools are going to be able to do.
Yeah, I mean, for those of you who know, just briefly, Terence Tao is regarded as the world's like greatest living mathematician, right? And he's kind of even saying like, hey, no more than 20 years out, like I'm not even going to be able to help. Right. So kind of where, and as the commentator said, where does that leave the rest of us? So I think it's just a good way of contextualizing, the advances in math.
And here's an example of a young researcher, 24-year-old Karina Hong, and has a startup, Axiom Math. It's already raised $60 million and was able to solve a 130-year-old problem and disproved a 30-year-old conjecture. And her goal is to build a super intelligent mathematician. And we're seeing more developments like this. And as you start to fine tune and apply some of the tools that we already have, it's going to be astonishing to see where we're able to go next.
Yeah, I had read the story, but I had it when I went to get the picture to put on the slide. I was like, oh my gosh, she looks so young. She could be like a high school debater. The other thing that's kind of interesting about the story is that she hired one of her former professors, I believe from UVA, into her company. And I also read that this professor is originally skeptical of, kind of AI and math, but now he's obviously fully on board. And, we're starting to see some practical things too, like GPT-5 solved an open math problem. Like an open math problem is one, people haven't been able to solve. Even people like Terence Tao, right, have not been able to solve this math problem, but it did it without human help.
And any of my students, if you'd like to hire me for your AI startup, just let me know.
And it's just making a lot of advances, right? So advances in math kind of underlies, right, all of the sciences. So it's kind of leading to advances in science. This is from Andrew Nee's blog. AI will transition from being a tool for efficiency to a tool for discovery, right? It's not just doing research faster than any other human can do. It's making discoveries for relevant drugs and products, which, are going to increase the human lifespan.
Getting into some shifts in K-12, thinking about educational applications. This is a really interesting story that Stefan shared from Wall Street Journal, talking about the role of trade schools. And some of those popular schools in Massachusetts now are trade schools, and getting into discussions about how they suggest that different employers, businesses, unions, hospitals, tech firms can adopt a school or a district to be able to develop those pathway programs. And it's a good applied way of helping students kind of be prepared for the workforce. Also, a great way to make sure that our educational process is really in tune with what the needs are of the employers. Although it raises some questions about what does that mean then for more traditional forms of education, liberal arts education. I think that there's some open questions there.
Yeah, and the other, it's interesting to know the Massachusetts article. It referenced Lexington, Massachusetts, which is a wealthy community. A lot of people, science, tech, law, and a lot of academics, from Harvard and MIT, like they live there, and it's really these families that are starting to get interested in these more vocational programs because they realize, like, this vocational learning is going to be an important part of the future in an important way to make education relevant to their kids. Because I think, and I alluded to this earlier, like kids are just going to be able to do like a lot more, a lot faster. So, this is a teenager who was working, with a professor at Caltech, right? So someone who clearly, kind of understands technology and kind of knew what to do with it. But what he was able to discover, an unexpected source of like millions of new space objects, like where they were using like a machine learning learning model, right? So he's a teenager. He hasn't even graduated from high school yet. And then the chief administrator at NASA said, "Hey, I'll just hire this person right now." And this is his reaction to him saying that, "I'll give you a job," right? So it's like, you don't even graduate. You would think that normally, someone to even be considered for a job like that. I mean, they'd certainly have to graduate high school, have a traditional 4-year, college degree in, math and physics, probably a master's, maybe a PhD. But he's able to kind of leverage, right, additional intelligence, a team of intelligences, right, to go out and kind of make a discovery. It's really incredible.
And not an average kid by any means. Obviously, very talented to be working with a professor at Caltech while in high school, but doing something innovative, utilizing archival data from NASA, being able to use some machine learning techniques to be able to explore that data. And it goes back to something I think we talked about at the end of the semester wrap up, and we were discussing an interview with Fei Li, where she talked about how students having those skills and being able to learn on their own is probably going to be more important than just having a degree. And if you have to choose between them, you're probably going to pick the student who's able to learn on their own and do more, even if they haven't graduated or completed something, as opposed to somebody that had a degree before. And that really does bring back the questions about the return on investment, about what students are looking for with their degree. And it's not to say that we don't need 4-year degrees or that we shouldn't have a traditional education, but it is changing the way that many in industry are going to be looking at that. And we have to be aware of those changes and attitudes.
Yeah, and I think, to your point, so, so can non-average student working with Caltech, one argument I've kind of been making is that we need to start providing more opportunities for high school students to work with people. You're not going to have that capacity in a high school, right? At least at a broad level, right? Maybe in some certain instances. But, what kind of networks can be built to connect students, right? To professors who can help them live. They're going to help them now in high school. They don't have to wait till the students like show up on a campus and live in a dorm. There could be a whole system for that. And also, just connecting them to online resources where they can learn. As I mentioned, I saw a class where a student just took an online course and improved his product, right? So we want to be kind of pushing out learning opportunities beyond what exists in physical high schools, because it just there's no real way to scale all the new instruction that's going to be needed.
Certainly. So we see other articles like this from Stephen Mintz, The End of the American University as We Know It. And some of this is a bit of hyperbole, a little bit of clickbait, but there's also there are a lot of questions about how higher ed is going to change. And there are a lot of demands for change. And there's a need to be able to react to some of those market pressures. And I think for those of us in higher ed, we need to be aware of them. It's not to say that we need to throw everything out and start fresh or to totally embrace all of these changes, but we need to provide some new options. And I think some new models have to be developed.
Yeah, and because as you say, right, more young people are questioning the value of college, right? Like, if you're going into your freshman year, if you're a freshman this year, or let's say you're a high school senior and you're going to enter your freshman year, who knows what the job? We'll talk about more AI and jobs later, but who knows what the job market's going to look like in 4 years, right? And even if we did in an industry, it could radically change by something that an AI is invented, right? So that's a burning question. The second is how much money most students are taking on a lot of debt to go to college. How is that ever going to be repaid? Right. Third, like, why are they taking classes that, they don't have any interest? I think that's what one of the things that I think universities are going to struggle with the most is kids just aren't going to want to take like the required courses and things that, they don't want to learn about that they don't think are going to help them because there's just so much like intellectual power like inside a university. I just think if it was kind of, distributed and applied in a better way, then, universities would have probably a lot more potential and maybe, you know, we may still have the end of the American university as we know it, right? But we could have something new and something better.
I think the problem, though, with if we go too far with it, and it's the assumption that why should students have to take classes they aren't interested in? I also think that if we were to start fresh and say we want an AI university, we would include courses that students wouldn't recognize as being important. They don't know yet, and it's unfair for us to expect them to have a clear understanding of which exact course they need to be successful in the future. Part of the problem is that we need to do a better job as educators of really articulating the value of each of those courses. We do need to rethink the liberal arts, not to get rid of the liberal arts, but we do need to rethink how the liberal arts is packaged, how we present that to students, how it is that it's incorporated within the use of AI tools. I'm a strong believer in the importance of the liberal arts for a study of AI and for effective and ethical use of AI in society. But we have to be able to explain why that's important. And I think once we do that, then you're able to get some buy-in. You're able to move beyond it. It's concerning to me, though, when we see headlines like this talking about schools are rethinking. That's not the same thing as some people assume that means getting rid of the liberal arts or getting rid of gen ed. That's really not in the best interest of students. But it is important that in higher ed that we come forward a little bit for we better articulate what the needs are, what the benefits are to students, and that we're able to be really clear about what the limits are, how far you really need to go with a liberal arts degree, and to be able to get some of the benefits from it. It maybe isn't going to look the same as it did a generation ago, but to just throw it out and to assume that we don't need it, I think is certainly going to be a mistake.
And in this book here by Brian Alexander, you can follow him online. He says a lot of provocative things about universities. His kind of peak higher ed. It's a new book. It just came out, but I'm sure his kind of basic idea is like we've kind of reached the peak of what people were just kind of willing to kind of blindly accept is kind of being valuable. College degree is inherently valuable. If I get it, I'll make more money. I'm willing to take on any amount of debt to do it, even going hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt to get a degree that maybe kind of on average doesn't really pay very much. I noticed actually today, I should have included a slide under the new government FAFSA form. When you fill it out, if you select your degree, it'll to show you what your projected earnings are before you decide maybe to take on some student loans. And there'll be a huge debate about that, I'm sure. But I think his argument is just kind of the blind acceptance of just having a degree, no matter what it is, and it's worth any amount of money they're willing to charge you for. It is over.
And Brian is certainly an important person to follow. He does a really great job of documenting, showing some of the crisis that higher ed is facing, schools that are closing or programs that are closing. And as a futurist, is doing a really good job of starting to look around the corner to see what's coming next. And also, as it says on the cover, how to survive the looming academic crisis. There's certainly a lot there to explore.
Right? But I don't think anyone's saying like, oh, we just shouldn't have higher ed at all anymore. It's just whether they're going to adapt to the moment and change, right? Or whether they're going to be Kodak, right? And kind of go out of business, right? And it just says in 2026, the work shifts to infrastructure, execution, and rebuilding college to career pipelines. And I think that's one thing that people really kind of just keep emphasizing. There needs to be a direct link, right? From at least most of what you're studying to an opportunity, in a career, whether you're going to come out of high school, college, graduate school, professional schools or whatever, there just kind of needs to be a more concrete tie.
Which is going to be even more difficult as we look at some of the challenges occurring in the job market with possible disruption from AI being introduced. That's going to be a tall order. This is a really interesting story that we just saw this week, and it was something that was blogged about by this NYU business school professor from Stern, talking about an experience where they had, and maybe some other instructors have experienced this as well, that the students were turning in work that really seemed like this really advanced memos that they couldn't really defend in class. When he was asking them about the memos they were turning in, the student work that they were turning in, they couldn't adequately explain them or defend them. So he moved to use oral exams, and actually, in a pretty interesting way, worked with some colleagues to build out oral exams run through 11 labs. So it was all run by AI so he could scale it. And it was possible to be able to do this with all of his students. I think it said that it was something like 35 students. It cost them about $15 in compute time to be able to run it. And then also had it graded by AI using several different models, averaging out some of the scores and being evaluated by Claude as kind of the chair of the evaluation committee. It was really interesting to read. What struck me is that this is something, Stefan and I have been talking about for years, the importance of oral communication for assessment, certainly something that's worth exploring. Now there are some really competent ways, some reasonable ways to be able to do that with AI tools. I wouldn't say that we should replace assessment, instructor-led assessment or grading with AI tools, but what about providing students with access to a tool like this to get ready for that oral exam or to be able to practice that presentation? There's some really accessible tools now that are relatively cheap, that are relatively easy to run, that students can get a lot more out of the experience rather than just a one and done assessment. I think there's some real potential here, and it was certainly an intriguing story.
Like, now if the committee of AIs gives them a 97 and you give them like a 95, right? Okay. There's a little bit of judgment kind of in there, but they're going to be at their dean's office like pretty fast saying, Professor
Sure.
Rao discriminated against me.
We've seen a lot of examples, though, of people talking about building a GPT with including the rubric, not to give a grade, but to be able to say, hey, here's how you're able to improve upon your paper before you submit it to Stefan's assignment. And it doesn't give a grade, but it could say for this sector of the rubric, this is what's missing, or this is something you did well, or something you can improve upon. So maybe it shouldn't be giving grades. You're right. That's going to be problematic in the same way that if you went to a grade and got a grade from the teaching assistant and then got a grade from the professor, and they're different, which one's the better grade, and which one should you be given? I think more the matter of being able to develop these tools and making them accessible to students so that it's not just we turn in one item and we get one grade and that's the only chance to be able to improve upon it. But we have, what this really does is it demonstrates that we have really cheap and easy ways that students can work through an iterative process to be able to get revision feedback on those revisions to make it even better and to be able to improve upon it. And exactly the skill sets that we want students to be able to be thinking about. It's not a one shot. It shouldn't be one shot work that you're doing in class. It should be about revision and reflection and working on making it better. Well, now we're talking about some other challenges outside of education, and getting in discussions about unemployment.
Well, this chart, it just shows that as the models essentially grow and become more sophisticated, the number of kind of entry-level jobs is declining. And excuse me, that's because the AI can do a lot of the entry level jobs. But now, once it can do those entry level jobs, it's going to start to move into the next layer. So, this is looking at some aggregated data. And, this person there, call him the godfather of SaaS. I hadn't heard of him, so I don't know. But I'll take their credit for it. He said he replaced most of his sales team with AI agents. We're done hiring humans. And if you read the article, it says the AI agents are selling quite well for him. So we all, it's something we think of that needs to be done by a human, right? Sales, like there is this kind of like human connection, human trust, maybe not for every product, obviously, right? But for a lot of things. But, and he said he kind of started it by accident because like, not by accident, but it made him think about it. 2 years is like highly paid, like sales people quit. So he's just kind of like, well, can I automate this? Instead of bringing on like 2 more humans for a couple $100,000, and he got the AI to do it. So it's kind of a little scary. that it's able to do kind of that type of work.
And as you get it, this is a really interesting story looking at possible unemployment. When you think about how a core function of a discipline or career or work, in this case, accounting, if you can't run assessment without AI, without worrying about AI just kind of replacing the work that could be done in the course, then you really have to worry about whether or not AI can just do the job entirely. In this case, the accounting body scrapped remote exams just to combat cheating. That tends to suggest that if AI is able to do it that well, that somebody could use AI to be able to complete those exams, to get accredited, to be able to get the degree, to be able to get the license that they would need for accounting, then that competency is not really AI proof. We have to really think about what that's going to mean for a whole line of different kinds of jobs.
It's just somebody asked, he lost his job to an AI. And then we kind of like joke a little bit, but people are losing jobs to AI. So, well, what kind of work could I do? And it says like, well, you could go cut trees. And then he's like, well, I've kind of got back to cutting trees like for longer hours, but my back hurts. Took a break. He's saying, not only that, like all the people start losing jobs are going to become looking for the tree jobs, which I think is something, we'll start to see, right? In some ways, I think it'll be positive. Like some of the people lose their jobs, they'll go start their own companies. We'll have a lot of new products and we'll have a lot of new services. Maybe some people, there's a teacher shortage. Maybe some people will become teachers or go into nursing. There's a nursing shortage. But because of that, like, there's not a lot of conversation. It's going to be hard for people to think where to go because nobody's really talking about that, right? Like, where do you go? Most people don't know if they lose their job that, if they, you want to take your best shot, like it is probably something now that's kind of physical, right? Or it's working with a team of AI agents to build your own business. Or here's some areas, there's a lot of areas in education that could really use some experts, right? And they can help you get a little bit of a teaching experience, right? So that's an area where more people are needed, but most people have no idea because we're not talking about it.
And even when we do talk about it, we have to be very realistic. Stefan's right. They'll be able to go and start a business perhaps and be entrepreneurial. There aren't many people in our society that have been taught how to be effective entrepreneurs, that have the experience or really have that built into their DNA. Not everybody's meant to be an entrepreneur. And maybe we could work on the next generation to make sure that we help them develop those entrepreneurial skills. But for many people in the workforce, they have been, encouraged to not be very entrepreneurial, to be honest. And so it's going to be really hard for that kind of adjustment to take place. We need to have more than just the discussion of it. We need to have a broader societal discussion about what the next steps are going to be, not just individual options, but what we do as a society, because we're only scratching the surface right now, and it's just going to compound upon itself as we find more and more disruption in the labor market.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I've said this before. I think, every high school student, maybe not next year may not be practical, but, maybe if sophomore years are on, right? They should learn how to build and start a business, whether it succeeds or not. Everyone business is. It should be like basically a graduation requirement. Right now, the graduation requirements are all like, how much knowledge have you mastered? And learning how to master knowledge is important, but it's not going to give you that much of a leg up, right? Maybe it's a minimally sufficient condition. It's not going to get you anywhere compared to somebody who knows how to build a business. And for a lot of people, that's going to be the stopgap. Like, I mean, that's going to be the fallback. Like, so you can always try to be entrepreneurial, right? You can't always necessarily get a job. We see more of this on LinkedIn. I see people post, and if you looked at their LinkedIn bios, they're really kind of impressive. And they're like, I submitted 1,000 job applications. I heard back from 2 people. One person ended up ghosting me, and I didn't make it through round 2 of the other interviews. So, it's a conversation we really need to have.
Here's a story about Hyundai planning on using 30,000 humanoid robots a year for factories by 2028, just leading further, not just in terms of white collar jobs, but also in factories. There's going to be broader disruption.
The other thing too, I want to mention, we say, okay, what was it? 30,000 robots by 2028. People could look at that and say 30,000 jobs. It's more than that because those robots can work all 3 shifts. Right. So even if, there's different ways to replace it, they could be faster or different in some of these ways. It's not like a direct calculation, right? But you have robots working 24/7 in the dark in very confined spaces, right? In ways that no humans could work, even under the most abusive conditions, right? So, it's going to have a pretty big impact.
These stories about robotics, thinking about autonomous driving, is a story on the left of somebody, David Moss, who announced that he successfully completed the world's first USA coast-to-coast full fully autonomous drive using Tesla, and it's supervised full self-driving, but you can set it up in such a way that you can let it run itself and not disengage it. And he claims that he was able to do that from leaving the Tesla diner in Los Angeles and then drive to Myrtle Beach 20 hours later and 2 days later, that he was able to complete that. And on the right, you see an example of self-driving with a Mercedes-Benz electric vehicle, actually, and also a story a bit about how NVIDIA is pushing self-driving forward as a category. And this is something that's been developed quite a bit, and we're really at a tipping point. When you get into one of these cars and you see how well it's able to handle autonomous driving, it's worlds different than it was a year ago or 2 years ago. And I think we're going to see a lot more self-driving cars. And when you think about that, not just for cars, of course, that disrupts drivers, and that's one of the biggest jobs in the world is human drivers. But you also think about that in terms of what robotic cars or vehicles are able to do in work settings. And so there's a lot more that's going to lead to in terms of other unemployment and disruption of the labor market.
And, this is just kind of cool, so China put on some great drone shows. I saw in the US people were posting their photos with some New Year's fireworks. I didn't see any posts of drone shows, but this drone show, we'll add the video in, has about 10,000 drones, all kind of simultaneously and orchestrated by the AI. So, that just kind of really shows you, A, how far the technology has come, B, how far ahead, at least kind of in robotics, arguably, that maybe China is, or at least a very near peer competitor. And people don't really see that. They don't understand China, right? Like they make it like, oh, there's these backwards like communists, and they don't go to work and they just get free healthcare. And it's like, no, they're killing it in science and technology. And it also kind of just helps to raise the awareness of their own publics, right, about the significance of the technology, which is not something that's happening here.
One thing that I talked a little bit about in our last episode at the end of the fall semester was what I see as kind of the growing backlash, in large part because of data centers. Living in Virginia, we see a lot of resistance to data centers. This is a story talking about the data center rebellion is here. It's reshaping the political landscape. Again, I think this is going to be a major part of the upcoming midterm elections, local elections, as well as national level, where there are a number of politicians, especially those with a more populist message, that'll be talking about economic disruption, but also building data centers and what that might mean. And so this backlash against AI is building, and it's happening in a number of different quarters. I think that's something that's certainly continued to grow.
They say, there's all these articles starting to be written about the midterm elections, right? And, is Trump going to back away from kind of his support of AI, right? As we get closer to the election, who's going to benefit from this? The Democrats. We also see, and I mentioned this before, it's like, there's just such animosity right now in the US towards like social services, right? Whether it's like, oh, they kind of breed dependence, or the people are lazy, or they shouldn't get them because they're here as immigrants, or because there's all this corruption. I think Trump today, like, kind of cut like $10 billion in social service spending to like some of the Democratic states, right? It's like, so we're seeing like all this unemployment, right? As we've kind of been documenting. And then there's also these cutbacks in social services, and we're going to need these social services. If anything, we're going to need more of them, right? People talk about universal basic income, universal basic services. All the leading AI people say you're going to need universal basic income, at least to a degree. We're going to have universal basic services. Like, no one is denying this. Even people who say like, oh, over the long term, there'll be more jobs. They're talking about how there's going to be significant unemployment in the short term. And, how is this going to play out politically, kind of relative to these other issues? I'm sure there'll be a lot of Democratic ads, showing Trump talking about data centers, and then data centers in like communities where there's opposition saying he likes AI, and then, stories about people losing their jobs to an AI, maybe that person saying, oh, I lost, my job to like an AI, and then it'll be like Trump supporting AI. So, I don't know, it's all going to shake out against Trump and the Republicans, but, this may become, the one of the most important issues in the midterm elections.
Yeah, I think it definitely will.
And, this last thing I just kind of threw, there's not a lot of context, but, we're always talking about regulations, regulating AI. Trump's been trying to stop like all regulation. It's hard. He has this new executive order. We shouldn't have any regulations. If you put any regulation on AI, then, even on like deep fakes and, these completely inappropriate images that are being generated, we won't be able to compete with China and AI. And it's like, well, why? I mean, the arguments don't make a lot of sense, but, even then you see China trying to put on reasonable regulations. Like, we don't want people getting addicted to companion AI chatbots. We don't want inappropriate images like showing up. Like, China doesn't think that like we should just have a completely unregulated AI ecosystem. And they don't think that if they do, they're not going to be able to compete with the United States in AI. And, to a degree, it kind of follows up on this, resistance thing there, right? I guess it could have made a new category regulation or just put as part of the resistance. Like, well, people don't want to right now constrain the AI at all. And we probably need to put some constraints, at least on the application, if not the development, at least on the application of AI.
And that's certainly something that we're going to be following up with over the coming months. So welcome to 2026. Thanks, Stefan, for all of this. And I look forward to seeing what the next week's update looks like.
Thanks a lot, Anand. Yeah, it's been great.